All right, we're rolling. Welcome, Drink with James, episode 116. We're back in what we call internally the wealth room for no other reason than it was red. It feels like it's velvet encrusted. It is not. It is just Benjamin Moore. This week, super excited to be talking to Valerie Eguavoen from two accounts. You guys out there who just have one are lazy. She's got two, On a Curve and You Belong Now. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
This is like your last Fashion Week thing that you're doing?
Yes.
You just here, how long, did you do the whole Fashion Week?
I've been here for almost 10 days now. I think I'm ready to go back to North Carolina.
If you have a North Carolina to go back to.
I hope so.
It feels like,
right now.
I feel like it's like the hurricane's going south.
Yeah.
So you should be fine.
Yeah,
Your flight's canceled or you?
No, it's still on. So Saturday I'll be there.
Okay, there you go. And how was Fashion Week?
It was amazing. It was really good this year. This is my third fall coming, and it was just amazing to see people like I follow on Instagram connect with brands. So it's been awesome. And
you started it off with a bang. I was scrolling through my feed the other day and saw her on Vogue's Instagram. How did that happen?
Well, I'm glad you didn't mute my feed because I saw your other posts where you mute people, but that's good. I'm glad you're watching. It was amazing. It's such an honor to be featured in Vogue. I've been saying it since I was a teenager that I'm gonna be a Vogue, and it finally happened. So I'm really happy. I don't take it for granted. Janelle, who's an amazing writer at Vogue, reached out about a month ago to talk about inclusion in the fashion industry, plus size women, and I knew the article was coming out, but I didn't know they were going to feature me on their Instagram page. So that was
photos
a little crazy.
Fire as well.
Thank
It
you.
was amazing. You look great. Yeah, so I mean that's a nice way to kick it off. I mean, did you get just like a barrage of messages from every person who's ever claimed to know you?
No, I feel like everyone who reached out was genuinely excited for me. I was getting texts and calls, so I was super excited. My sister is really proud. My family's really proud in general, so I'm just so happy.
I mean, it's a strange thing to get older and do something and have the thing that you thought like maybe would never happen, but would that be amazing if it happened to happen? And you know, it's certainly not the end of the road, but it's got to be kind of wild to go onto Vogue's Instagram and see yourself.
Yeah.
Listen, I want to start by saying how we came to be sitting here. You guys know a couple months ago, we had an episode where I was talking about Revolve and the way that I was expressing my dissatisfaction with what they were doing and trying to give tips to influencers was wrong, one, ill said, two. The optics were also terrible. I was drinking a Budweiser in front of an American flag. So all across the board, it was not great. And you called me out.
I did.
And then we ended up having a conversation about it, and we've spoken a few times on the phone. You came into the office, and I think that you have you're very articulate on the point. You have like let's say, I mean, you have a point of view on this that I think is fresh, and certainly you're not backing down from fights. You put your hand up when you thought that we had misspoken, and I've enjoyed our communication since. So I thought, let's have you come on the show, and let's talk about that. Diversity is something that comes up a lot in questions, and not just diversity of skin color, not just diversity of body type. There are influencers across the world who are different in innumerable ways, who are saying, hey, how do I break into this industry that doesn't seem super interested in having me there? So let's just kind of start with how did you, that's how we met, but how did we get to the point where, how'd you start your Instagram accounts? Why'd you do this? How'd you get into this world?
Yeah. So I started my blog. It's called Fashion on a Curve at the time, almost 5 years ago now, and it was just a plus-size fashion blog. That's what I focused on. And then I think over the years, at the time I was in law school and I was graduating, And I really wanted to push for something different on my blog because I love fashion, I love the creativity of it, but I wanted to say something else. And my work is in this political, civic engagement, sort of civil rights, social justice field. And I wanted to figure out how to incorporate that with my blog. And so a couple of years ago, I sort of made the transition to start including things that are happening around me. So not just fashion. How can I tell stories that are going on around me? How can I share people's stories? What are the issues that are affecting me? And so I started to push that in my blog. I changed the name to On a Curve so that it sort of encompassed everything and not just fashion. And then for You Belong Now, we started in January of this year, and it just was a result of speaking out against the issues that we're seeing, not just in the influencer industry, but just in society, and they relate to fashion so much. And it's been a huge response because I think this is not the first time. I'm not a pioneer of like social justice movement or speaking out about diversity in the fashion industry. I'm just sort of continuing the work of other people. I mean, Adana Hardison, she is my idol. I wish I ran into her during Fashion Week, but I didn't one day. But I'm just continuing people's work, and I think that we have to continue because every time there's like an uproar, there's a fire, revolve, people get like, you know, super interested in talking about it. Brands get trendy, you know, about diversity. I think we just have to continue the conversation. And, you know, the days, I was being like interviewed almost every day. That doesn't happen as much anymore, but that's fine. We're just continuing the work. Something else is gonna happen. What are we doing to make sure that we are sort of working towards change? Because every time we stop, we have to take, you know, a few steps back and restart the conversation. I wanna just keep that going.
Yeah. How do you balance, you know, having the blog that focuses on fashion, and you know, having the one that kind of focuses on social justice? How do you kind of cross-pollinate those? How do you know, are you bringing the social justice things into On a Curve? Are you bringing the fashion stuff into You Belong Now? Kind of how do you think about those two accounts and what content is going on them?
I think for a long time, my blog was siloed from everything I was doing in the social justice field. And I don't know how, I came to the realization that this is all of these things, whether it's fashion, whether it's social justice, I mean, I'm experiencing all of them. And I have something to say about all of them, and they relate in a way. So I think I've sort of figured out the balance of sharing things like that on my blog. For a long time, I was scared to be like posting, you know, things like this on my Instagram, because I was like, well, people are coming to me for fashion, or they want to know how to dress a plus-size body. You know, why should I really talk about this, even though I'm doing the work on the outside, even though I have those views on the outside? And so it took me a while, but I finally did it. The response from those posts do just as well as other posts, and I encourage other influencers to do the same, because people come to your blog, I feel like, for your point of view. They come to hear what you have to say, not just about the clothes. Like, look at my favorite people to follow on Instagram are not just people I like their style or their makeup. I like what they have to say. I care about their point of view. Do they care about the people around them? I mean, Colin Kaepernick, Beyonce, all these people are huge influencers, and they stand for something. So I just really try to strike that balance. And with You Belong Now, it's advocating for justice in the creative industry. So I think that there's creativity and fashion in that, but the central like focus and theme of it is to push for diversity.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting there is you talking about how you've been passionate and active in the social justice space and slowly integrated it into what you were talking about on your Instagram. I think that is a place where a lot of influencers are at now, where they see the world and they have problems with what's happening, but they're afraid to talk about it because they say, well, I've had this conversation with influencers. They say, well, I know I have a lot of followers in Texas and I know they're Republicans and they don't want to hear about politics. What do you say to those influencers who feel like maybe they want to use their platform to highlight things they see in the world that they don't like, or they do, but they're afraid to offend someone?
I think that it's all about knowing where you stand and whether you are going to be on the right side of history or not. It's not the popular answer. Just by talking about diversity, you're not going to gain a bunch of followers. Because people do it every day and people unfollow them. But I think it's more of an issue of right or wrong. It's the right thing to do, and I think that the more people you can reach with your platform, the more minds you can change, the more you can change our culture, then you're sort of educating people. People are relearning, whether they, have an argument with you about a post that you put up. It's a chance for a conversation. It's a chance to change the conversation. What are you using your platform for? And if you post something that you have a view on and someone unfollows you or challenges you and says, I think this is wrong, you should take it down, do you really want that person following you? Mm-hmm. Are you blogging because you want the money? Are you blogging because you want the likes? Because a lot of people have said to me, you can't stay in this industry if you don't really like what you're doing. Right. So I do believe that a lot of influencers are doing this because they truly do love what they're talking about, what their platform is about, whether your platform is about travel, whether it's about fashion, whether you're blogging about food, you truly do love that. So if it's not about sort of the monetary gain, which is nice, which is good, which is great.
Right, we all want money.
You have to stand for something, and what is it that you want to speak on, and what does your voice stand for in the community? So I just think it's important for people to really consider that. And it's just about starting. You don't have to write every single blog post about social justice. You don't have to speak in a certain way. You don't have to write a thesis. But I think that just starting the conversation, engaging, making sure you're not bypassing things that are important. The death of Nia Wilson was just so tragic. And I go on Instagram, I'm scrolling, and people are posting nothing about it or posting their new vacay, and that's great. We all love a good vacay, but I still care about justice. I still care about the issues that affect people like me. And another thing I would say is, if it doesn't affect you, you have to be an ally. If you really want to work in the social, if you really want to make a difference and help and change things, whether or not that things actually affect you, you have to do your part in echoing people's voices. So I think that's important.
Yeah. And how do you go about, okay, so let's say you're an influencer, right? And the internet can be an angry place, right? And there are always people who know more about a thing that you're talking about than you, that will raise their hand and say, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. Here's 4,000 facts that show why you're wrong. And I think that there is, sometimes some trepidation there. How do you feel like you go about, again, obviously someone who you're devoting your life to this stuff, right? And so you are very knowledgeable what's going on and all the players in this space and kind of the history of it. And to your point, you have a personal connection with it that, someone who grew up privileged and white like myself doesn't, And so how can people better educate themselves to be able to speak confidently? Because I think that there is sometimes a gap between what you believe and what you feel confident speaking in. How do you bridge that gap? If you see something in the world that you say, that doesn't feel right, I need to learn more about this to be able to. Do you think you need to let me step back, this is a rambling question, but do you think you need to learn more before you speak out and say this is wrong? Yeah. Or can you just say this doesn't look right?
Yeah. I think that's the key word there, is learning. What I found when people sort of don't have the words to articulate how they think something is wrong or express that something is wrong on their platform, if they're privileged, is that they don't actually understand or believe what exactly is going on. There's no digging deep into the root of the issue. So yes, Black Lives Matter, but people aren't taking the time to understand. I think we underestimate the power and the importance of listening to impacted people. And so when it's surface level and you're just reacting to something that's going on without having a true understanding of why different things are systemic and you might not understand it on a surface level, I think that's where people get sort of trepidation about wanting to speak out, because they feel like, I don't fully understand. And there's nothing wrong with not fully understanding. I think a lot of people are scared to engage in that conversation because it will come across that you don't understand. Right. And they're scared of the backlash of not understanding, scared of being labeled as privileged, but privilege is a thing. Yeah. I think that the moment people accept that they do have privilege, that's the teaching moment. That's when you can actually move forward and have a conversation and then learn the things that you need to know in order to speak out when things happen. Yeah. So yes, post, but take the time to talk to the people. I'm sure there are a lot of influencers who are friends with other influencers like myself or who look like me. Talk to those people, have conversations. I don't think we should say, okay, we're not gonna, I don't even want to discuss something with you because you're white. I don't want to discuss anything with you because you're black. Those conversations are so important. That's how we got here.
Yeah.
I called them out. Those conversations are so important. You learn so much from each other, and there's nothing wrong with saying I'm wrong. And I think one of the things I did appreciate was you saying, look, I'm not going to come at you with the bullshit like it was never my intention to offend black influencers. You said, you know, it's just wrong. It's a shitty way of thinking, and let's figure out how we can move forward. So I think that's important.
Yeah. You said something in there that was interesting as well, I think, with understanding privilege.
Yeah.
And I think some of the uphill battle is that across the entire world is that privilege is so helpful to the people who have it, right? And so you don't see a lot of people out there trying to tip the scale against themselves.
Yeah. And it's easy to ignore it because that's how you grew up.
It's not your experience.
You don't think about it, right? You don't think about it. You're like, no, I don't have any extra privilege. I just grew up this way. But when you just crack open a history book and figure out how did we get here? How is it that 140 million people are living in poverty in the United States, and what's the demographic of the people who are living in poverty? I think you really start to understand, oh shit, like there is a long history, and these things aren't just circumstance, right? People aren't just born into it. I think luck has a lot to do with life. I think right timing has a lot to do with life, but there are systemic issues that can be traced back that historians have written about again and again, and I think we can't underestimate that. Just because we had a black president, just because we've moved so far, just because I could sit in this office building with another white person and no one's, you know, arresting me for being here, just because we're past segregation does not mean that it doesn't linger in sort of the lifeline of this country. So I just think that we need to be aware and cognizant that we're still dealing with racism. We have worse voting rights in the United States than we had in the 60s, which is insane.
Yeah, getting worse all the time.
It's insane. So, yeah.
Do you also think that there's that you're fighting uphill in that the idea that privilege exists and that the world isn't the same for everyone, and that maybe your success isn't fully based on you and your hard work goes against the idea of the American dream and the self-made man and all of these things, where it is hard for people to say, sure, I've worked hard, but I didn't have to work as hard as other people, or I got opportunities that wouldn't have been available to other people. And that's a difficult thing for people to admit because they have their own mythology, especially in America, of just like, I have created this life, this is all me.
I think that's right. People don't want to admit that because it sort of takes away from the self-made sort of persona that a lot of people like to have. I don't believe I'm self-made in any way. There are a lot of people behind me who have brought me to where I am, and I think that you can apply that notion of privilege to anyone. I'm privileged. I'm a law school graduate. I grew up in an okay family. My dad was a professional soccer player. Like, we weren't like living lavish, you know what I mean? But I was not living in poverty, which a lot of people are. And so how do you measure what you've been able to achieve against someone who grew up with absolutely nothing? And I think that, you know, generational wealth is almost non-existent for people who look like me, right? I can't rely on, okay, this is gonna be there when when I finish college, or if I do this, I'm gonna get this trust fund. Like, I have loans through college and law school. You know, yes, I now have the privilege of being a law school grad, but now I have thousands and thousands of dollars of debt that the government will never forgive.
Right.
It dies with you. I mean, it doesn't die with you, actually. You know, your family's gonna have to pay that off, and it's like, all right, I'm gonna have to spend this much of my salary in my lifetime to pay that off. And someone else who might have gotten the same loans or might not have had to get loans and was able to pay that through their family, you know, or just having people around you. So I think we've got to think of privilege about just the things that are around us, right? Think about your life how did you get here? You know, and I have no doubt that a lot of people worked hard.
Yeah.
There are a lot of white influencers that work hard. There are a lot of skinny influencers that work hard. There are a lot of privileged people that work hard. You work hard, you know what I mean? But it does not negate the fact that there are a lot of things that you can stand on, that can support you, and that can hold you up. So,
so I'm watching this,
okay.
right? And I am who we're talking about. I'm privileged white influencer, you know. What do I? But I'm watching this and I'm nodding my head and I'm agreeing with you. You know, where do you start? You know, we talked about learning, but I, like you, am frustrated by how little influencers use their platform for social good, or just good in general. You know, combined, this community is one of the most powerful voices in the world. If they all got behind a thing, it would change. It would, you know. So how do people who are watching this, who might be thinking, okay, well, maybe this week is the time I say something. How do they start?
I think, yes, absolutely. First, listening, and I think after listening is taking a look inside. That's the hardest part. Diversity, inclusion, it's not cute. It's the hard, gritty, rough conversations, tears involved in knowing what you're doing, what you're contributing to. And I think a lot of people don't want to push that. A lot of people don't want to get to that point, but that's what it takes, is having really true honesty about yourself. What internal things can I work on? You know, what am I doing within my family to change people's views? What am I doing to change or to sort of counter the privilege I have every day I walk in the office? How can I make a difference in my everyday life? And then the next thing is actually making the change, right? So not just speaking up about it, but when you see something, doing something about it. If you're in a position of power, if you're able to change something in an industry, do it. And be unafraid about it and be confident about it and push the boundaries, because I think that when people benefit from something, it's comfortable, and if the industry already exists that way, people don't want to make a difference. But I think that if you're in a position of power, it's important to use that power for good. So I think that it's just about starting to make the change, and I think don't underestimate the importance of talking to people who are impacted by the things you're trying to change, because I think a lot of people think, okay, yeah, now I'm just going to slap 5 black models on my runway, or I'm just going to hire a couple plus size models and there we go, I'm diverse. But like, are you actually taking the advice? Are you actually seeking information from people who are saying, I'm experiencing this? So I think that you know, talking with directly impacted people to inform the choices and the decisions you're going to make is one of the key things.
And it's something we talked about. Like, I readily admitted to you that Fohr has a diversity problem with its staff. You know, we in some ways we do better than a lot of companies. We're 60% female. But we don't have the like diversity mix that we should, and especially as we are now running larger and larger campaigns, we need to make sure that we have, you know, people that have different lives and different viewpoints helping us pick the people who are best to send those brand messages off. And I think it's something that I readily admit and we're trying to fix. And you know, it was a great point from you that we were talking about, of just like, for the brands out there who are watching this, just it's not enough to hire the, you know, 1 or 2 black girls to be in your campaign. You need to have those voices at the table, not to like check a box, but because this is, you know, just from a business standpoint, this is an enormous market that, you know, you'd be foolish to not try and serve and understand and speak to.
I think Shelby Ivy Christie, I don't know if you know her Instagram is Bronze Bombshell. She wrote about sort of what brands miss out in not having diverse campaigns. You know, she was pitching, I think one time at a magazine, she was pitching them about homecoming and how, you know, how they could be inclusive and actually make money in catering to this audience, and nobody had a clue what she was talking about. Julie Wilson at Essence, you know, was talking about, she has to know everything about white people's hair, right? She has to know what kind of shampoo they use, but when you talk about curls, edges, you know, these magazines have no clue. They don't know how to. And so that's why you get blunders where you see a black model, you know, in the face of something that's just not realistic. And so I think that it definitely including the voices of people who you're trying to reach is important, especially in the decision-making aspect of things. And I think a lot of people say, you know, well, diversity is not really important in sort of decision-making as long as we cast a diverse crew, as long as our external-facing, you know, aspects of our company are diverse, we're all good, but that's how you make big blunders.
Right.
And that's how you end up saying, it was never my intention, you know what I mean? And also, it's not just about having black people in the room. It's not just about having plus-size people in the room. Having people that have a lens and have a mind that's geared towards making a difference and not just looking out for themselves is super important as well. Yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, how, you know, as an organization, if you're watching this saying, okay, great, but how?
As a brand? As
a you know, where do, you know, because it's something we talked about. Was that if, you know, if you grew up with whatever privilege you have, your networks are those same things, you know, and maybe also you have an organization that as someone who's different, you look at it and say, oh, do I want to be the only black person working there? Or do I want to be the only plus size person working there? Or the only this or the only that? You know, and it gets harder to attract, to find that talent. So for those organizations, where do you start that search, you think?
I think to your last point, that is the reality for a lot of people. Being the only black person in the classroom, being the only black person at the company. In the fashion industry, I feel like that's such a huge thing, being the only black editor, or there not being any black editors and all your supervisors are white. And so I think that for brands, one, it's like what we're doing right now. You know, we had a conversation before this. We've had a conversation over the phone. First, reaching out to people. I think there's a myth that influencers of color or influencers who want to make a difference are hard to find. I think that's a myth. I think that's laziness on a lot of brands' part, and just saying, okay, well, we don't know really, you know, who to talk to, how to. There are so many people out there who are wanting to make a change, who are wanting to help, who are wanting to assist, and wanting to start that conversation about how your brand can change its culture. I want to do that. You know, I want to be able to help people understand sort of the intricacies of not just systemic issues, but how your brand can stop contributing to that. So I think that, first of all, dispelling that myth that it's hard to start the conversation, I think it's just people are uncomfortable and they'd rather not do it than actually have the conversation. I mean, you know, when brands get called out online, a lot of them don't respond. You know, they respond. I think a brand that got called out responded by sending influencers like free clothes when they didn't post any influencers of color in their feed. That's not the right way to go. How about you reach out to the people who are calling you out and hear them out, right? I'm not saying you have to hire them or, you know, just talk with them and listen to the things that they're saying to you. I think, again, do not underestimate that power of actually listening and letting it sink in, and not just saying, okay, we've had this talk now, you know, we're all good, but really understanding why what you're doing is wrong, and then looking internally in your company and saying, okay, these are the steps I can take. And I think that when you do that listening, you will find that there are ways that you can shift your culture, and there are ways that you can make changes.
That's a great point. Influencers out there, I think, you know, how it becomes relevant is if somebody, I think especially this happens if you're a bigger influencer. If someone raises their hand and they say, hey, this seems, this seems tone deaf, this seems whatever, like this is whatever they call you out. What bothers me sometimes is influencers will like sick their following on somebody to try and like attack, you know, instead of stepping back and saying, you know, as influencers, if you get big enough, you're a brand. You know, you are an organization. You've got people working for you. You've got this image. You've got advertisers. And I think sometimes there are people who are just mean-spirited and they're trolling you, and they're best to, you know, if someone's just like, you're ugly, I don't really think that that's worth like responding to. But if someone is like, hey, this feels wrong and I don't feel like the way you're saying this is right, I would encourage people to, you know, to do what I did and say, okay, hey, like, I want to learn, because I'm not talking about this because I want brownie points or a pat on the back. I actually do think there's a problem. I actually do want to try and help. And so if someone from the community is raising their hand saying, you're not helping, I think it's worth saying, okay, what's happening there? And I think, you know, influencers, it doesn't have to necessarily be about diversity, but if someone is like, hey, like, sick of seeing every single post you do be sponsored, instead of responding and being like, this is a job, this is my job, how dare you say what to do, be like, oh, hey, interested to have a conversation about that. You've been following me for years, you're part of my success, I want to hear about that. So I love that idea of reaching out. I think, you know, transitioning here to talk about influencers, and to talk about influencers who view themselves, you know, as niche or diverse or, you know, not the kind of cookie cutter norm of the industry. I'd love to hear you talk a bit about what it's like, you know, being an underrepresented voice in a space and trying to break in, and what those people who feel frustrated by the status quo of the industry, what they should be doing.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people, like myself and a lot of people who reached out after You Belong Now, I really was getting messages from women who I looked up to in the community who have just said, you know, we've been working on this for years, we've been trying to figure out how to break into this industry and how to make it happen. And I think that what we need to understand is that it's not the industry, it's the world. This is the world that we live in, and you just apply that to every single sector, every single job in the world, including fashion. I think that for influencers who want to, you know, figure out how to make a change and how to be how to push against brands, they have to continue to speak out. And I think that a lot of times you get nervous about speaking out because you're like, okay, this might be my opportunity. This might be the time that the brand wants to work with me. If I talk about what they're doing, they might not want to work with me anymore. And I think there's someone I follow on Instagram, Fumi Toronto. She said, staying silent for an opportunity you're never gonna get is probably the worst thing that you can do because you're just at zero all the time. And so I think there's this, another myth that we got to dispel is scarcity, that there's not enough for everybody. So if I just need to stay in my lane, work on my thing, and I'll be fine.
Someone will find me. Yes. It's gonna happen.
We underestimate the value of sharing. Yeah. There are a lot of girls in the industry who are just so willing to share their experience and introduce you to their network because they understand how difficult it is for Black women in this industry to make it. And I feel like the influencer industry is sort of new, it's evolving, it's changing, and people are learning new things and how to adapt to it, but what's constant is the issue of discrimination. That's not gonna change. Right. That has a pattern. And I think that the more we see that, band together and really put our foot down, right? Really raise our voices to make sure that even if it doesn't happen in our lifetime, we're paving the way for influencers of another generation. We are making the difference now. And I think that that's what a lot of, you know, civil rights leaders in the 60s did. They knew that they were never, ever, ever going to see those victories implemented in their lifetime, but I think it's just the work we have to do. You know, yes, I'm super excited about Vogue. I didn't think that was ever gonna happen, but there's so many things, right, that are still, to a lot of us, seem unattainable, and I think that we just have to keep pushing. I also think that it's important to work on your craft. You know, one influencer reached out to me and said, you know, I really appreciate what you're doing on You Belong Now, but I also want you to make sure that you're looking at the people who are actually doing a lot of work to get to where they are. So I try to share as much as I can, and I want people to write guest blog posts about educational things. How can I get better at my photography? How can I get better at my branding? How can I get better at my feed? You know, all these things that are changing in an industry. I think that coupled with the fight for inclusion and diversity, it's a win. It's a win. So I really, you know, either one, I think both are important, but I think that we always have to start with the conversation about inclusion.
Yeah. So it's kind of twofold of like, one, being like having the skills, being good, and like, cause there's, I guess it's like two-part, right? You're an influencer. You need to take beautiful photos. You need to have good style. You need to be able to write, relatable captions. You need to be able to create engaging content. And then the other side of saying push back when you see things that don't look right.
I mean, and to the point about, I think why I say first is the pushback and second is continuing to sort of work on your craft, is that we cannot talk about working on your craft and becoming better without talking about sort of the institutional barriers that people have to opportunity.
Because you're saying like I could be amazing. I'm not going to get this opportunity. It's never going to happen.
Well, not necessarily that, but like the opportunity to have access to the things that you need to make good content. A lot of people say, oh, well, like, don't worry about your DSLR, just take your photos on your camera. That's trending now. You will be surprised at how many people don't have access to a good iPhone. Like, I think people take things like that for granted. There are a lot of creative people living in poverty. That's just the reality of things, right? So I think that we have to, as we say, work on your craft, we have to also give back and give people the opportunity that they don't have, right? How can I share? I love when bloggers who are maybe photographers share a little bit about their skill, right? How can I make how can I find you different platforms that you can use that you don't have to pay for? I didn't start using Lightroom until this year, and it changed my life and it's made my content amazing, but I couldn't afford to use it for a while, you know what I mean? So I think, yes, there are cheaper options, but there are things that people just can't afford. I think we have to be mindful of that in the giving back and in saying that people have to work on their craft. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. I feel like there is a right and wrong way, correct me if I'm wrong, a right and wrong way to call a brand out when you see something that happens, and I'm wondering, as someone who, you've done this a few times, what, if you're talking to people watching the show who see something and they say, that feels wrong, I want to say something about that. Do you have a way that you think about doing that when you say, this is an issue that I want to try and get behind?
I'm going to say this, James. Don't get offended now. I think that when people are affected, no one can tell anybody how to express rage, how to express anger, how to express the things that hurt them. My privilege has allowed me to be able to study things. My privilege has allowed me to be able to experience things that have led me to thinking in this way, or that have led me to articulating things in a certain way that other people might not have experienced, right? And so I remember, actually my sister's here, I remember a few years ago we were in New York and something happened. I can't remember. It was the death of another Black teenager. And I was talking to her about it. I was talking to my cousin as well, and I just started screaming. Like, I just started crying, screaming, right? And I feel like the way that I express issues of social justice has changed. It's evolved over the years, but I just think that you cannot tell people how to express that because people feel things in different ways. Now, there's still moments where I'm just enraged by things, but I've learned to channel that. I think it's effective to channel it because I've seen better results when I channel that anger into something else. And when I call people out, I'm not like Mrs. Call Out or something, but like when I talk about these issues, I stay on the issue. I stay on the truth. I don't talk about the person's hair. I don't talk about how they look. This person is ugly. That's not necessary. I'm talking about the truth. And I think that when you stand in that confidence and in the truth, nothing else the other person says can be right. I think knowing that and having confidence in that you're on the right side is really empowering. And it's just about continuing to do it and learning and reading and researching the issues that affect us and how we got to be here and not reliving history. Because I think a lot of what we're experiencing experiencing has happened already. I think we're just experiencing them in a new way and in a new generation. But I think the more we study and the more we research our history, we're apt to sort of figure out, okay, how did these people deal with it, and how can I, in this day and age, do it for my generation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I love that. Yeah. Where are you channeling it? You know, you say that you're channeling it into more effective mediums or places. Where are you?
Yeah. I think not exactly the medium, but in how I communicate. Communication is a huge key to anything. And so I think that in the way I've started to understand issues of racism and what I've actually understood them to be have allowed me to figure out, okay, these are the things that I need to say, because when you are your passion for something and your issue with something can get buried in how you communicate it to people. Channeling it into effective communication. What are the points I need to draw out here? What have I seen? A lot of things that I actually used to start You Belong Now were things that I had worked on in the Poor People's Campaign. If you look at sort of the mission and principles of the Poor People's Campaign, if you look at the tactics and what they're trying to change and the goals, you will see the similarities. They are things that I've experienced in my career. They are things I've learned along the way. So using that and using the things you learn to be able to communicate and change this industry, I think is key. So that's what I'm trying to do whenever I call people out or whenever I reach out to someone to talk about issues of diversity. I don't leave it at, I just don't like your page because you don't post any Black people. I give you a history lesson.
Right.
If you read like a lot of the work on You Belong Now, the website and the Instagram, the mission story highlight, it's a lot of language about, you know, the issues that we're facing. Yeah.
One other point you made in there that I want to touch on, I think, that I've seen from following you is, and it's not much different than what we talk about all the time, is consistency. I do think that, like, you know, you talk about something and you talk about it a good amount and you follow up on it, and if the brand responds or something changes, you follow up on that. And I think that, you know, to anyone who's looking to talk about anything, being consistent is great, you know, and it's one thing to go to a march and post a photo of yourself at a march and be like, okay, I did my good deed for the decade. It's another thing to like really make this a part of what you're talking about. And I think that I certainly encourage influencers who are looking to speak out about, you know, social justice, social good, politics, whatever it might be, to fold it in and make it a part of your life. And to your point, it doesn't need to be everything. It doesn't need to be every day. It could be once a week, you know, but try and be consistent, because I think that makes such a difference in all the content you do.
Yeah, be consistent and be responsive.
Okay, last question is, where do you think the influencer space, like, where do you see this all changing? You know, you say that a lot of what's you know, happening in the world and in a microcosm in the influencer space is things that have happened before. Do you think it's getting better? Do you think it's going to change a lot? Do you hope it will, but you don't really believe it will?
I think if you asked me in 2008, November 2008, my hope for America, is it better? I would have been like, yes, we just elected a Black president. We are doing great over here. But I think that what we're masking is, I think that racism and discrimination has a tendency to evolve with the thing that it's within. And so yes, we might see surface level changes. We might see things get better, right? I'm yet to look at the fashion report about the runways and how many designers actually had models of color. And I'm sure it's going to look better than last year. I'm pretty sure of that. But are we really changing anything? Are we changing the system? Look at where we are in our political landscape right now. Like, not to say it was all fixed in 2008, but this is scary. This is not normal. Like, do not normalize this Trump presidency in any way. This is insane. So I think applying that to the influencer industry, yes, we're going to see things get better on the surface, but I think that it's the test of time and who keeps working. Because like I say, the days of glory for a lot of activists, it's not every day they're in front of the camera. They're working in nonprofit organizations, making nothing, you know, working for people, making people's lives better. So I think that we're going to have to see with time. I think that our duty is to keep working and keep fighting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you all don't follow Valerie, On a Curve, you belong now. Follow her. Not only is it an educational follow, but it is a entertaining one as well. I've enjoyed following you, and I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll catch you guys next week. Cheers.